The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training facility as Sarah Martinez quietly entered the armory. At 24, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled marksmen in her unit, though few people knew her name. She preferred it that way. While other soldiers sought recognition and medals, Sarah found peace in the precision of her craft and the silence of her success. The armory smelled of gun oil and metal polish. Rows of weapons lined the walls, each one meticulously maintained and ready for action. Sarah moved through the space with practiced ease, her boots making barely a whisper on the concrete floor. She had been coming here every morning for 3 months, always before the official training hours began. It was her private time, her sanctuary where she could focus entirely on her weapon and her skills. Today, like every other day, she made her way to the corner where the M24 sniper rifles were stored. The M24 was her weapon of choice, a bolt-action rifle that demanded respect and rewarded precision. She had grown to know this particular rifle intimately, understanding its quirks and capabilities better than anyone else in her unit. The weapon felt like an extension of herself when she held it. Sarah carefully lifted the rifle from its rack, running her hands along the smooth stock. The weight was familiar and comforting. She had learned long ago that a sniper's relationship with their rifle was sacred. Every scratch, every adjustment, every modification told a story. This M24 had stories to tell, though Sarah was still writing her own chapter with it. She settled into her usual position at the maintenance bench, spreading out her cleaning kit with a methodical precision that defined everything she did. The routine was meditative for her. Disassembly came first, each component removed and placed in its designated spot. The barrel received special attention, as it was the heart of accuracy. She cleaned it with almost religious devotion, understanding that even the smallest imperfection could mean the difference between life and death in the field. As she worked, Sarah's mind wandered to her journey to this moment. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she had learned to shoot from her grandfather, a Korean War veteran who understood the value of discipline and patience. He had taught her that shooting was not about aggression or violence, but about control, focus, and responsibility. Those lessons had shaped her approach to everything in life. Joining the military had been a natural choice for Sarah. She wanted to serve her country and use her skills for something greater than herself. Boot camp had been challenging, but not in the way she expected. The physical demands were manageable, but dealing with the attention her shooting abilities attracted was difficult. She preferred to blend into the background, to be the soldier who quietly got the job done without fanfare. Her commanding officers quickly recognized her potential, but Sarah consistently declined opportunities for advanced training programs that would put her in the spotlight. She was content to serve in her current capacity, knowing that her skills were being put to good use even if nobody knew her name. This attitude had earned her the respect of her peers, though it had also frustrated some of her superiors who wanted to showcase her abilities. As she reassembled the M24, Sarah thought about the upcoming training exercise schedule for later that morning. It was a routine marksmanship evaluation, the kind she had completed dozens of times before. She never aimed for the highest score, preferring to perform just well enough to meet expectations without drawing unwanted attention. It was a delicate balance, one she had mastered over the years. The rifle clicked together with satisfying precision. Sarah held it up to the light, checking the alignment and ensuring everything was perfect. She had developed her own modifications over time, small adjustments that improved the weapon's performance without being obvious to casual observation. These modifications were a secret, known only to her, and carefully disguised to appear as standard wear and tear. The sound of footsteps echoed from the corridor outside the armory. Sarah quickly gathered her cleaning supplies, returning them to their proper places. She preferred to complete her morning routine without interruption, but the training day was beginning whether she was ready or not. She secured the M24 in its case and prepared to join the rest of her unit for the day's activities. Walking toward the door, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished surface of a weapon cabinet. She saw a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform crisp and professional. Her face showed determination and focus, qualities that had served her well throughout her military career. But there was something else in her reflection, something she rarely acknowledged, even to herself. There was loneliness. Being the best at something could be isolating, especially when you worked hard to hide that excellence. Sarah had few close friends in her unit, partly by choice and partly because her skill set intimidated others. She was respected but not necessarily liked, admired but not truly known. It was the price she paid for her chosen path, and she had made peace with it long ago. The morning air was crisp as Sarah stepped outside the armory. The training facility was beginning to come alive with activity. Soldiers emerged from barracks, equipment was being prepared, and the day's exercises were taking shape. Sarah observed it all with the same attention to detail she brought to everything else, noting patterns and behaviors that others might miss. She made her way to the assembly area where her unit was gathering for the morning briefing. As usual, she took a position toward the back of the group, close enough to hear everything but far enough to avoid drawing attention. Her sergeant, a career soldier named Williams, was reviewing the day's schedule and emphasizing the importance of the marksmanship evaluation. Sarah listened with half her attention while scanning the area around them. It was an automatic behavior, one that had become second nature during her time in the military. She noticed everything: the wind direction, the lighting conditions, the positions of other soldiers, the location of equipment and vehicles. Information was power, and Sarah collected information constantly without even thinking about it. The briefing concluded with assignments for the various training exercises. Sarah was assigned to the third group for marksmanship evaluation, which meant she would have time to observe the other shooters before her turn. She preferred it this way, as it allowed her to gauge the competition and adjust her performance accordingly. As the soldiers dispersed to their assigned activities, Sarah noticed a black sedan pulling up to the administration building. It was unusual to see civilian vehicles on the training facility, and the car's occupants remained inside with the engine running. Sarah filed this observation away, though she could not have known at the time how significant it would prove to be. The morning progressed according to schedule, with Sarah moving through the various training stations with her characteristic quiet efficiency. She performed well in all activities, but never exceptionally, maintaining the careful balance she had perfected over the years. Her fellow soldiers had come to expect this level of performance from her, solid but unremarkable. When it was time for her marksmanship evaluation, Sarah approached the firing line with the same calm demeanor she brought to every challenge. The targets were set at various distances, from 300 to 800 meters, testing different aspects of precision shooting. The M24 felt perfect in her hands as she settled into position, her breathing automatically falling into the rhythm she had practiced thousands of times. The first shot was at 300 meters, a relatively easy distance for someone of her skill level. Sarah aimed for the center of the target, but deliberately pulled her shot slightly to the left, scoring a respectable but not outstanding hit. The second shot was at 500 meters, and again she aimed for good but not exceptional accuracy. As she prepared for the 800-meter shot, Sarah became aware that she was being watched more closely than usual. She could feel eyes on her from multiple directions, though she could not identify the sources without breaking her focus. The sensation was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of awareness that comes from years of training and experience. The 800-meter shot required her full attention. At this distance, wind, elevation, and countless other factors came into play. Sarah made her calculations automatically, adjustments that had become instinctive through countless hours of practice. She squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had learned from her grandfather all those years ago. The shot was perfect, despite her intention to perform adequately rather than exceptionally. Muscle memory and training took over. The bullet struck the exact center of the target, a shot that would have been impressive even for the unit's designated marksman. Sarah immediately realized her mistake, but it was too late to take it back. She completed the remaining shots with her usual controlled performance, but the damage was done. That single perfect shot at 800 meters would be remembered and discussed. As she cleared her weapon and prepared to leave the firing line, Sarah noticed that the observers who had been watching her were now talking among themselves with obvious interest. Walking back to rejoin her unit, Sarah passed the black sedan she had noticed earlier. The windows were tinted, but she caught a glimpse of movement inside. Someone was definitely watching the training exercise, and she had a growing suspicion that her perfect shot had not gone unnoticed by whoever was in that vehicle. The rest of the training day passed without incident, but Sarah could not shake the feeling that something had changed. Small looks and brief conversations stopped when she approached. Her perfect shot had created ripples that were still spreading through the unit, and she knew that her carefully maintained anonymity might be coming to an end. As the day concluded and soldiers began returning equipment and preparing for evening chow, Sarah lingered near the armory. She wanted to spend a few more minutes with her M24 to restore the sense of peace and control that had been disrupted by the day's events. The weapon was her constant, her anchor in a world that often felt unpredictable and chaotic. The armory was empty when she entered, the silence welcoming after a day of noise and activity. Sarah retrieved her rifle and settled once again at the maintenance bench, though the weapon did not need cleaning. Sometimes the ritual itself was more important than the practical purpose, and tonight was one of those times. As she ran her hands along the familiar contours of the M24, Sarah thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. Every choice she had made, every skill she had developed, every sacrifice she had accepted had led to this day when a single shot might have changed everything. She had no way of knowing what consequences might follow, but she knew that her life of quiet service was about to become much more complicated. 3 days after the marksmanship evaluation, Sarah noticed the changes had begun. Nothing dramatic or obvious, but small shifts that someone with her observational skills could not miss. Her sergeant spoke to her differently, with a new note of respect that had not been there before. Fellow soldiers asked more questions about her background, questions that seemed casual but felt calculated. Most telling of all, she had been reassigned to additional training exercises that were normally reserved for the unit's elite performers. Sarah tried to maintain her usual routine, arriving early at the armory for her private time with the M24. But even this sanctuary felt different now. She sensed that her solitary moments were being monitored, though she could never identify exactly how or by whom. The feeling was subtle but persistent, like a whisper at the edge of hearing that never quite resolved into words. On Thursday morning, as she completed her weapon maintenance ritual, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of polished boots approaching the armory. The footsteps were measured and confident, belonging to someone accustomed to command. She quickly secured her cleaning supplies and stood at attention as the door opened. The man who entered was unlike any soldier Sarah had encountered in her 3 years of service. He wore the uniform of a colonel, but there was something about him that suggested his authority extended far beyond normal military channels. He was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his surroundings. His uniform bore no unit insignia that Sarah recognized, and his bearings suggested someone who operated in shadows rather than sunlight. "Specialist Martinez," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who never needed to raise it to be obeyed. "I am Colonel Harrison. I have been observing your work." Sarah remained at attention, her mind racing to process this unexpected encounter. She had heard rumors of special units that operated outside normal military structure, groups that recruited exceptional soldiers for classified missions. The colonel's presence suggested those rumors might be more than military folklore. At ease, Colonel Harrison continued, stepping closer to examine the M24 that Sarah had been working on. "This is your preferred weapon, I understand. You have made some interesting modifications." The observation sent a chill through Sarah's body. The modifications she had made were subtle and carefully concealed. For someone to notice them required either exceptional knowledge of the weapon system or detailed surveillance of her activities. Either possibility was troubling. "Sir, I have made only minor adjustments within regulation parameters," she replied carefully, choosing her words with the same precision she brought to shooting. Colonel Harrison smiled, but it was not a warm expression. "Specialist, I have been studying your service record and your performance data for the past week. Your official scores are consistently good, but never exceptional. However, your actual capabilities appear to be significantly higher than what you choose to demonstrate." Sarah felt her carefully constructed anonymity crumbling around her. Someone had been watching her closely enough to see through the performance she had maintained for years. The realization was both terrifying and strangely liberating, like a secret finally being exposed to daylight. "I serve to the best of my abilities, sir," she said, maintaining the formal tone that training demanded. "Do you?" Colonel Harrison moved to stand directly in front of her, his eyes studying her face as if reading a classified document. "Your shot at 800 meters 3 days ago was not just good, specialist. It was perfect. The kind of shot that most snipers achieve perhaps once in 100 attempts, and you made it look routine." The accusation hung in the air between them. Sarah realized that denying her abilities would be pointless with someone who had clearly done his research. But admitting to deliberately underperforming could have serious consequences for her military career. Colonel Harrison seemed to read her thoughts. "You are not in trouble, Specialist Martinez. Quite the opposite. I represent a unit that has use for soldiers with your particular combination of skills and discretion. Your ability to hide your capabilities demonstrates exactly the kind of operational security we value." Sarah's mind was spinning with questions, but military training kept her focused on the immediate situation. "What kind of unit, sir?" "The kind that does not officially exist," Colonel Harrison replied matter-of-factly. "The kind that handles problems which cannot be solved through conventional military channels. The kind that requires soldiers who can work alone, make difficult decisions, and accomplish missions without recognition or glory." The description resonated with something deep in Sarah's personality. She had always been more comfortable working alone, had always preferred results over recognition. But the implications of what the colonel was suggesting were enormous. She would be leaving everything familiar behind, entering a world where the rules were different and the stakes were higher. "I have not requested transfer from my current unit, sir," she said carefully. Colonel Harrison retrieved a folder from his jacket, thick with documents that suggested extensive preparation. "Your current commanding officer believes you have been selected for advanced sniper training at Fort Benning. The orders are already cut, and you will be reporting there next Monday. What happens after that depends on your performance during the selection process." Sarah understood that she was being recruited whether she wanted it or not. The colonel was offering her a choice, but it was the kind of choice where only one answer was really acceptable. Her life of quiet service was ending, replaced by something she could not yet fully comprehend. "May I ask how you became aware of my capabilities, sir?" she ventured. "Several ways," Colonel Harrison said, opening the folder to reveal photographs and documents. "We have people who watch for soldiers like you, individuals who possess exceptional skills, but prefer to remain in the background. Your marksmanship instructors from basic training flag you as someone with unusual potential. Your current sergeant has filed reports noting discrepancies between your demonstrated abilities and your official scores." He handed her a photograph that made her blood run cold. It showed her in the armory, working on her M24 modifications with the kind of focus and expertise that contradicted her official skill level. The angle suggested it had been taken from a concealed position, meaning she had been under surveillance for longer than she had realized. "We also have this," Colonel Harrison continued, producing another photograph. This one showed Sarah as a teenager, competing in civilian shooting competitions before joining the military. She was holding a trophy, her face bright with the kind of excitement she had learned to suppress during her military service. Sarah Martinez, age 17, winner of the Texas State Long Range Championship, Colonel Harrison read from the accompanying document. First teenager to win the competition in over 30 years. Your grandfather must have been very proud. The mention of her grandfather hit Sarah harder than she expected. He had been proud, prouder than she had ever seen him before or after. That competition had been the last one she entered before joining the military, her way of honoring the skills he had taught her before putting them to use for her country. He died 2 years ago, Sarah said quietly. I know, Colonel Harrison replied, his tone softening slightly. He was a good soldier and a better man. The kind of person who understood that some services cannot be recognized publicly, but are no less important for their secrecy. Sarah realized that Colonel Harrison had done more than research her military record. He had investigated her entire life, learning about her family, her motivations, and her personal history. The thoroughness of his preparation suggested that this recruitment was not a casual decision, but part of a larger plan. What exactly would be expected of me, sir? She asked. Colonel Harrison closed the folder, but not before Sarah caught a glimpse of other documents and photographs that suggested the investigation into her background had been exhaustive. Initially, training, learning new skills, adapting to different operational parameters, understanding how to work within a structure that values results over procedures. After that, missions that I cannot describe in detail, but which serve important national interests. The vague description was clearly intentional. Sarah understood that she was being asked to commit to something she could not fully understand, to trust people she did not know with decisions that would affect the rest of her life. It was the ultimate test of the discipline and dedication she had developed over years of military service. How long do I have to decide, sir? You have already decided, Colonel Harrison said with certainty that was somehow not arrogant. You decided when you made that perfect shot 3 days ago. You decided when you chose to develop skills far beyond what your current position requires. You decided when you joined the military to serve something larger than yourself. Sarah knew he was right. Every choice she had made since joining the military had led to this moment. Her desire to serve, her dedication to excellence, and her preference for working alone had created a profile that made her exactly what this mysterious unit was looking for. The training at Fort Benning, she said. How long will it last? 6 weeks for the official program, Colonel Harrison replied. What happens after that depends on how well you perform and whether you demonstrate the qualities we are looking for. Some candidates return to their original units with enhanced skills and interesting stories to tell. Others move on to different opportunities. Sarah understood the unspoken message. This was a test as much as a recruitment, an evaluation that would determine whether she truly belonged in whatever organization Colonel Harrison represented. The thought was both intimidating and exciting. Colonel Harrison moved toward the door, then paused to look back at her. One more thing, Specialist Martinez. Your grandfather served in Korea with distinction, but that was not his only service to his country. Ask yourself why a small-town veteran would know enough about specialized shooting techniques to train a teenage girl to win state championships. The statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her grandfather had always been secretive about certain aspects of his military service, deflecting questions with humor or changing the subject entirely. She had assumed it was because the memories were painful, but Colonel Harrison was suggesting something entirely different. Sir, what are you implying? I am implying that certain kinds of service run in families, Colonel Harrison said. Your grandfather would be proud of the soldier you have become, and he would understand the choice you are making today. With that, he left the armory, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts and her M24. The weapon that had been her constant companion suddenly felt different in her hands, as if it too understood that everything was about to change. She thought about her grandfather's patient instruction, his emphasis on precision and control, and his insistence that shooting was about more than just hitting targets. Sarah spent the rest of the morning completing her normal duties, but her mind was focused on Colonel Harrison's visit and its implications. By afternoon, official orders had arrived, reassigning her to advanced sniper training at Fort Benning. The speed with which the paperwork had been processed confirmed that this recruitment had been planned long before their conversation in the armory. That evening, as she prepared for the transition that would begin on Monday, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. Every skill she had developed, every choice she had made, and every sacrifice she had accepted had led to this opportunity. She was leaving behind the known for the unknown, trading security for purpose, and accepting responsibility for missions she could not yet imagine. The M24 lay disassembled on her bunk, each component carefully cleaned and prepared for transport. Tomorrow she would begin packing her gear for the journey to Fort Benning and whatever lay beyond. Her quiet life of anonymous service was ending, replaced by something that promised to be far more challenging and potentially far more dangerous. But as Sarah looked at her reflection in the polished metal of her weapon, she realized that she was ready for whatever came next. The woman looking back at her was no longer hiding her capabilities or apologizing for her skills. She was a soldier preparing for a mission that would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about duty, service, and sacrifice. Fort Benning felt different from the moment Sarah stepped off the transport. The air carried a weight of expectation and intensity that went beyond normal military training facilities. Other soldiers moved with the purposeful efficiency of people who understood that every moment was being evaluated, every action measured against standards that were never explicitly stated but somehow universally understood. Sarah was assigned to a barracks that housed 12 other soldiers, all of whom had been recruited for the same mysterious advanced training program. The group was diverse in background and specialization, but they shared certain common characteristics that Sarah recognized immediately. They were all exceptionally skilled in their respective areas, all accustomed to working independently, and all possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of proven performance. Her bunkmate was a communications specialist named Rebecca Chun, a sergeant from California who spoke 3 languages fluently and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of electronic surveillance systems. Rebecca had the kind of analytical mind that could process complex information streams simultaneously, a skill that had apparently brought her to the attention of the same people who had recruited Sarah. "So you are the sniper everyone has been whispering about," Rebecca said as Sarah unpacked her gear. "The one who can supposedly hit targets that other people cannot even see." Sarah had learned to be cautious about discussing her capabilities, but the events of the past week had taught her that secrecy was no longer an option. "I shoot well enough," she replied diplomatically. Rebecca laughed, a sound that was both friendly and knowing. "We are all here because we do something well enough to attract attention from people who prefer to remain invisible. The question is whether we do it well enough to survive whatever they have planned for us." The first week of training revealed the true nature of what they were being prepared for. This was not enhanced military education in any conventional sense. Instead, it was a comprehensive evaluation of their ability to operate under conditions that normal soldiers would never encounter. They learned advanced surveillance techniques, practiced infiltration and extraction procedures, and studied target identification methods that were far more complex than standard military protocols. Sarah's shooting instruction was handled by a civilian contractor who introduced himself only as Martinez. He was perhaps 60 years old, with the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades working in harsh conditions. His knowledge of precision shooting was extraordinary, encompassing techniques and technologies that were not part of any standard military curriculum. "Forget everything you think you know about marksmanship," Martinez told Sarah during their first session. "Military sniping is about eliminating threats to your unit and completing missions. What we do here is about solving problems that cannot be addressed through conventional means." The distinction was subtle but crucial. Sarah was being trained not just to hit targets, but to make shots under conditions that would be considered impossible by traditional standards. She learned to compensate for extreme weather conditions, to calculate trajectories through urban environments with multiple variables, and to operate weapon systems that were significantly more advanced than anything she had encountered before. Martinez introduced her to a rifle that made her beloved M24 seem primitive by comparison. The weapon incorporated advanced optics, environmental sensors, and computational systems that could calculate complex ballistic solutions in real time. But despite its technological sophistication, the rifle still required the fundamental skills that Sarah had developed over years of practice. Technology is a tool, Martinez explained as Sarah familiarized herself with a new weapon system. But the most advanced rifle in the world is useless without a shooter who understands wind, distance, and timing. Your grandfather taught you well, but now we need to expand that foundation. The mention of her grandfather was clearly not accidental. Sarah was beginning to understand that everyone involved in this program knew far more about her background than she had initially realized. The knowledge was unsettling, but also strangely comforting, suggesting that she was part of something larger than herself. Training progressed rapidly, with each day bringing new challenges and higher expectations. Sarah learned to operate in urban environments, practicing shots from rooftops and abandoned buildings while accounting for variables like glass deflection and thermal updrafts. She studied anatomy and physiology, understanding not just how to hit targets, but how to achieve specific effects with surgical precision. The psychological preparation was equally intense. Sarah worked with instructors who taught her to compartmentalize emotions, to make difficult decisions under extreme stress, and to operate for extended periods without support or communication. These sessions were often more challenging than the physical training, requiring her to confront aspects of herself that she had never examined closely. "You have excellent technical skills," her psychological instructor told her after a particularly difficult simulation exercise. "But skills alone will not be sufficient for the missions you may be asked to undertake. You need to understand your own motivations and limitations before you can be trusted with the kind of responsibility we are discussing." Sarah found herself thinking often about Colonel Harrison's cryptic comments regarding her grandfather's service record. During a break between training sessions, she managed to access a computer terminal and conduct some research into his military background. What she discovered was troubling and illuminating in equal measure. Her grandfather's official service record was surprisingly sparse for someone who had served for over 20 years. Large portions of his career were classified or simply missing from the database. The records that did exist showed multiple deployments to locations and during time periods that did not match the stories he had told her about his military service. Further investigation revealed that her grandfather had been part of a unit that officially did not exist, a small group of specialists who handled missions that could not be acknowledged by conventional military channels. The realization explained much about his knowledge of advanced shooting techniques and his reluctance to discuss certain aspects of his service. Sarah also discovered something else that shocked her. Her grandfather had received several commendations for exceptional service, awards that had been classified and removed from his public record. He had been recognized for missions that saved lives and protected national interests, work that had gone unacknowledged for decades. The knowledge changed Sarah's perspective on her current situation. She was not being recruited for some shadowy organization of questionable purpose. Instead, she was being invited to continue a tradition of service that her grandfather had exemplified, work that was essential even if it could never be publicly recognized. Training intensified during the fourth week, with scenarios that tested not just individual skills, but the ability to work with a team under extreme conditions. Sarah found herself partnered with Rebecca and two other specialists for a complex urban infiltration exercise that required them to penetrate a simulated enemy facility and eliminate specific targets without detection. The mission was unlike anything Sarah had attempted before. She had to provide overwatch for her team while they navigated through a mock city filled with hostile actors and sophisticated surveillance systems. Her role required her to engage targets at extreme range while coordinating with team members who were operating under different tactical constraints. The exercise went perfectly until the final phase, when unexpected complications forced Sarah to make a shot that pushed the limits of both her equipment and her skills. The target was positioned behind ballistic glass in a moving vehicle at a distance of over 1,200 meters, with multiple environmental factors complicating the trajectory calculation. Sarah found herself in a moment of perfect clarity, the kind of focus her grandfather had taught her to achieve when everything else fell away except the relationship between the shooter, the rifle, and the target. She made adjustments for wind speed, humidity, target movement, and glass deflection, then squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had learned as a teenager. The shot was impossible by any reasonable standard, but it was also perfect. The simulation registered a successful target engagement, and Sarah's team completed their mission with complete success. But the implications of what she had just accomplished were far greater than any training exercise. Martinez appeared at Sarah's position moments after the shot, his expression mixing approval with something that might have been concern. "That was exceptional work," he said, "but it was also the kind of shot that changes everything. You understand what this means?" Sarah understood exactly what it meant. She had just demonstrated capabilities that placed her in an extremely small group of individuals worldwide. The shot she had made was not just difficult, it was the kind of performance that would make her invaluable for certain types of missions while simultaneously making her target for anyone who opposed those missions. "It means I am ready for whatever comes next," she replied. Martinez nodded slowly. "Yes, I believe you are. Colonel Harrison will be pleased with your progress." The mention of Colonel Harrison reminded Sarah that this entire experience was part of a larger evaluation process. She had been performing not just for her instructors, but for decision-makers who would determine her future based on reports and assessments that she would never see. That evening, as Sarah cleaned and maintained her equipment after the day's exercise, Rebecca approached her with an expression of mixed admiration and concern. "I watched your shot today," she said quietly. "That was not just good shooting, that was something else entirely. I have worked with some exceptional people over the years, but I have never seen anything like what you just did." Sarah appreciated Rebecca's honesty. Throughout their time at Fort Benning, the two had developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared understanding of the unique pressures they were facing. Having someone who understood the magnitude of what she had accomplished was both comforting and worrying. "I did what the mission required," Sarah said simply. "No," Rebecca replied firmly. "You did something that most people would consider impossible. That kind of capability comes with responsibilities that you may not be prepared for. I hope you understand what you are getting yourself into." Sarah spent much of that night thinking about Rebecca's warning. She was beginning to understand that exceptional ability was both a gift and a burden, opening doors to opportunities while simultaneously limiting options. The shot she had made that day had demonstrated that she possessed skills that very few people in the world could match, but it had also committed her to a path that she could not fully comprehend. The final weeks of training passed quickly, with each day bringing new challenges that tested different aspects of her capabilities. Sarah found herself consistently performing at levels that impressed even her experienced instructors, but she also noticed that the scenarios were becoming more complex and morally ambiguous. She was given missions that required her to make difficult decisions about target selection, situations where the rules of engagement were unclear and the consequences of failure were severe. These exercises forced her to confront the reality of what her skills might be used for in the real world. On the final day of the program, Sarah was called to a meeting with Colonel Harrison, who had apparently been monitoring her progress throughout the 6 weeks. He appeared in the same conference room where she had first learned about the advanced training program, but his demeanor was different now, more serious and purposeful. "Specialist Martinez," he began, using the same formal tone that had characterized their first meeting. "You have exceeded every expectation we had for your performance. Your instructors are unanimous in their assessment that you possess capabilities that make you valuable for our most challenging missions." Sarah remained at attention, but her mind was racing with questions about what would happen next. The training had been intense and demanding, but it had also been preparation for something larger and more significant than anything she had experienced before. However, Colonel Harrison continued. Exceptional capability must be matched with exceptional judgment. The final phase of your evaluation will not take place in a training facility. It will occur in the real world, under conditions where mistakes have genuine consequences. The statement sent a chill through Sarah's body. She had known that this moment was coming, but the reality of transitioning from training to actual operations was still intimidating. Everything she had learned and every skill she had developed was about to be tested under conditions where failure was not an option. Colonel Harrison handed her a sealed envelope. Your orders are inside. You will report to the specified location in 72 hours, where you will receive your first assignment. What happens after that will determine whether you have a future with our organization. Sarah accepted the envelope, feeling its weight as both opportunity and responsibility. Her life of quiet service was truly ending, replaced by something that promised to challenge everything she believed about duty, sacrifice, and the prices that had to be paid to protect the things that mattered most. The address in Colonel Harrison's envelope led Sarah to a nondescript office building in downtown Washington, the kind of place where thousands of people worked in jobs that had nothing to do with national security. But Sarah had learned to look beyond appearances, and subtle details told a different story. The security cameras were too sophisticated for a normal office building. The lobby guards carried themselves like former military personnel, and the elevators required key cards that suggested multiple levels of access control. Sarah reported to the 17th floor, where she was met by a woman who introduced herself as Director Walsh. She appeared to be in her 40s, with the kind of professional demeanor that suggested extensive experience in managing complex operations. Her handshake was firm, her questions direct, and her assessment of Sarah seemed to occur in real time as they spoke. Welcome to your new assignment, Specialist Martinez, Director Walsh said as she led Sarah through corridors that could have belonged to any government agency. Your training reports indicate exceptional performance, but now we need to see how you handle real-world applications. The briefing room was windowless and sterile, designed for conversations that could not be overheard or recorded. Sarah found herself seated across from Director Walsh and two other individuals who were introduced only by first names. The formal structure suggested that this was not a casual orientation, but a serious operational briefing. Your first assignment involves a situation that has been developing for several months. Director Walsh began, opening a folder that contained photographs and documents. We have identified a threat to American interests that cannot be addressed through conventional diplomatic or military channels. The photographs showed a man in his 50s, well-dressed and apparently wealthy, surrounded by the kind of security that suggested both importance and danger. Additional images revealed him meeting with known criminals and suspected terrorists, though always in locations where traditional surveillance was difficult or impossible. Viktor Kozlov, Director Walsh continued, is a businessman who uses legitimate enterprises to fund activities that threaten American lives and interests. He operates primarily in Eastern Europe, but his influence extends throughout the world. Traditional law enforcement cannot touch him because he is careful to maintain plausible deniability for his criminal activities. Sarah studied the photographs, noting details about Kozlov's security arrangements and movement patterns. Her training had taught her to analyze targets not just as shooting problems, but as complex operational challenges that required careful planning and precise execution. What is my role in addressing this threat? She asked. Kozlov will be attending a private auction in Prague next week, Director Walsh replied. The event will be held in a historic building with architectural features that create unique opportunities for someone with your particular skills. You will be part of a team that eliminates Kozlov and retrieves certain materials that he will be carrying. The casual way Director Walsh described assassination made Sarah pause. During her training at Fort Benning, she had engaged simulated targets and theoretical enemies, but this would be her first mission involving a real person whose death would have genuine consequences. The magnitude of what was being asked of her was both sobering and oddly liberating. How much support will I have? Sarah asked, focusing on tactical considerations rather than moral implications. Minimal, Director Walsh replied honestly. This operation requires complete deniability. You will work with 2 other specialists, both of whom have experience in this type of mission. Communication will be limited, extraction will be your responsibility, and if something goes wrong, official channels will not be able to help you. Sarah had expected this kind of operational constraint. Everything about her recruitment and training had emphasized independence and self-reliance. She was being asked to accomplish a mission that traditional military units could not attempt, using skills that few people in the world possessed. Director Walsh handed Sarah another folder, this one containing detailed architectural plans and surveillance reports. You have 48 hours to study the target location and develop your operational plan. Your flight to Prague departs Thursday morning, and the mission will take place the following evening. The timeline was aggressive, but manageable. Sarah had learned to work under compressed schedules during her training, though this would be her first experience planning an actual operation with lethal consequences. The responsibility was enormous, but she felt prepared for the challenge. There is one more thing, Director Walsh said, producing a small metal object that caught the light as she placed it on the table. Your grandfather earned this during his service with our organization. We thought you should have it. Sarah picked up the object and immediately recognized it as a military insignia, though unlike any she had ever seen. It depicted a stylized eye surrounded by crosshairs, with small details that suggested exceptional craftsmanship and significance. The metal was worn smooth in places, evidence of years of handling by someone who valued it highly. The Deadeye Insignia, Director Walsh explained. It is awarded to individuals who demonstrate exceptional precision under impossible conditions. Your grandfather earned his during a mission in Vietnam that saved the lives of an entire village. Only 12 people have ever received this recognition. Sarah turned the insignia over in her hands, feeling the weight of history and expectation. Her grandfather had carried this symbol for decades, a reminder of service that could never be publicly acknowledged, but was no less important for its secrecy. Now, it was hers, along with the responsibility it represented. Your grandfather would be proud, Director Walsh continued. He recommended you for recruitment before his death, though he waited until you demonstrated readiness on your own. The revelation was startling, but not entirely surprising. Sarah had suspected that her grandfather's influence extended beyond the shooting lessons he had given her as a teenager. Learning that he had specifically identified her as a potential candidate for this organization explained much about the thoroughness of her recruitment and the speed with which her training had progressed. Sarah attached the Deadeye Insignia to her uniform, feeling its weight as both honor and burden. She was no longer just a soldier following orders, but a specialist entrusted with missions that required exceptional skill and unwavering judgment. The transition was complete, and there was no possibility of returning to her previous life. The next 2 days passed in intensive preparation. Sarah studied the architectural plans until she could navigate the target building with her eyes closed. She memorized surveillance reports, weather forecasts, and contingency protocols. Most importantly, she developed a detailed shooting solution for a target elimination that would require precision under extraordinarily difficult conditions. The Prague auction was scheduled to take place in a renovated castle that had been converted into a private event space. The building's medieval architecture created multiple challenges for conventional security, but also provided opportunities for someone with Sarah's specialized skills. She identified a position in an adjacent church tower that would provide the necessary line of sight while maintaining the distance required for escape and evasion. Sarah's 2 teammates were introduced to her only hours before departure. Marcus was a former Delta Force operator who specialized in close protection and tactical support. Elena was a CIA operative with extensive experience in Eastern European operations and language skills that would be essential for navigating Prague's complex social and political environment. The team dynamic was professional, but distant, All three understood that this mission required complete focus and minimal personal attachment. They were specialists brought together for a specific purpose, not friends embarking on a shared adventure. The emotional distance was necessary for operational security and psychological protection. The flight to Prague was uneventful, giving Sarah time to review her mission parameters and visualize the shooting sequence she would need to execute. She found herself thinking about her grandfather and the missions he had completed for this organization, wondering what challenges he had faced and how he had managed the psychological pressure of lethal operations. Prague was beautiful in the way that European cities often are, with architecture that reflected centuries of history and cultural development. But Sarah saw the city through the lens of operational requirements, noting sightlines, escape routes, and tactical considerations that would affect her mission. Every detail was important, and failure to consider any variable could result in mission failure or worse. The team established their base of operations in a safe house that had been prepared by advanced personnel. The location provided secure communications, weapons storage, and planning facilities that would be essential for mission success. Sarah spent her first evening in Prague conducting reconnaissance of the target area, confirming details that could only be verified through direct observation. The church tower she had identified as her shooting position was even better than the architectural plans had suggested. The elevation provided an excellent angle for the required shot, while the building's religious significance made it unlikely to be searched by security personnel. Most importantly, the tower's bell mechanism provided perfect concealment for her equipment while allowing rapid repositioning if circumstances required. Sarah spent hours calculating ballistic solutions for the shot she would need to make. The distance was within her capabilities, but environmental factors unique to Prague's climate and topography required careful consideration. She had only one opportunity to eliminate Kozlov, and the margin for error was essentially zero. The night before the mission, Sarah found herself unable to sleep despite the exhaustion that followed days of intensive preparation. She lay in her bed thinking about the path that had brought her to this point, from her grandfather's patient instruction to Colonel Harrison's mysterious recruitment to the moment when she would squeeze the trigger that would end a human life for the first time. She thought about Viktor Kozlov, studying his photographs until his face was burned into her memory. He was someone's father, someone's husband, someone whose death would cause grief and pain regardless of his criminal activities. But he was also a threat to innocent people, someone whose continued existence enabled violence and suffering on a scale that she could barely comprehend. Sarah had been trained to compartmentalize these moral complexities, to focus on the mission rather than its broader implications. But the human cost of what she was about to do could not be completely ignored. She would carry the weight of this decision for the rest of her life, regardless of its necessity or justification. Morning came with the kind of overcast sky that was perfect for her operational requirements. Sarah checked and rechecked her equipment, ensuring that every component was perfectly calibrated and ready for use. Her rifle was a work of art, combining traditional craftsmanship with advanced technology in a way that would have impressed her grandfather. The final briefing was brief and focused. Marcus would provide perimeter security and tactical support. Elena would handle intelligence gathering and communication with extraction assets. Sarah would eliminate the target and retrieve the materials he carried, then move to the designated extraction point where the team would reunite for immediate departure from Prague. As Sarah prepared to leave for her position in the church tower, she caught her reflection in a mirror. The woman looking back at her was no longer the anonymous soldier who had cleaned weapons in a quiet armory just weeks before. This was a specialist preparing for a mission that would test every skill she possessed and every lesson she had learned. Sarah touched the Deadeye Insignia on her uniform, feeling the connection to her grandfather and the tradition of service he had represented. She was ready for whatever the next few hours would bring, armed with skills that few people in the world possessed, and motivated by a commitment to protecting innocent lives from those who would cause them harm. The mission was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez was prepared to prove that she was worthy of the trust that had been placed in her and the legacy she had inherited from a grandfather whose own service had remained secret until after his death. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but she carried it willingly as she set out to complete her first operational assignment. The church tower was everything Sarah had hoped it would be. The ancient stone walls provided perfect concealment, while the elevated position offered an unobstructed view of the castle, where Viktor Kozlov's auction was taking place. Sarah settled into position 3 hours before the target was scheduled to arrive, using the time to make final adjustments to her equipment and observe the security arrangements that would affect her mission. The rifle she carried was a masterpiece of precision engineering, incorporating advanced optics and computational systems that could calculate complex ballistic solutions in real time. But despite its technological sophistication, success still depended on the fundamental skills that her grandfather had taught her years before. Technology was a tool, but marksmanship remained an art that required patience, discipline, and perfect timing. Sarah watched through her scope as guests began arriving for the auction. The event attracted the kind of people who dealt in rare and valuable items without asking uncomfortable questions about their origins. Art dealers, private collectors, and wealthy individuals whose money came from sources that would not bear close scrutiny gather in the castle's main hall for an evening of bidding on objects that governments and museums could not officially acquire. Viktor Kozlov arrived precisely on schedule, his security detail moving with the professional efficiency that Sarah had expected based on her intelligence briefings. He was a careful man who understood that his business activities had created numerous enemies, people who would pay handsomely for the opportunity to eliminate him permanently. But his security arrangements were designed to counter conventional threats, not the kind of precision engagement that Sarah was preparing to deliver. As the auction began, Sarah monitored communications between her teammates through the encrypted radio system they were using. Marcus had identified several potential complications in the security perimeter, while Elena had confirmed that Kozlov was carrying the materials that needed to be retrieved. Everything was proceeding according to plan, but Sarah knew that operations rarely went exactly as briefed. The shot she needed to make was challenging, but within her capabilities. The distance was approximately 800 meters, well within the effective range of her rifle, but far enough to complicate the ballistic calculation. More importantly, the shot would need to be taken through a window while accounting for glass deflection and the target's movement within the auction hall. Sarah had practiced similar shots during her training at Fort Benning, but this was different in every way that mattered. The target was a real person whose death would have genuine consequences. The mission had strategic implications that she could not fully comprehend, and failure would result in more than just poor marks in a training exercise. As the auction progressed, Sarah watched Kozlov through her scope, studying his movements and identifying the precise moment when he would be in the optimal position for target engagement. He was bidding on a medieval manuscript that had been stolen from a monastery decades earlier, one of many artifacts that would disappear into private collections where their true origins would be forgotten. Sarah thought about her grandfather as she prepared for the shot that would define her operational career. He had faced similar moments during his service, times when a single decision would determine the success or failure of critically important missions. The Deadeye Insignia she wore connected her to that tradition of service, but it also reminded her that exceptional capability came with exceptional responsibility. The moment arrived with the kind of clarity that Sarah had learned to recognize during her training. Kozlov moved to examine the manuscript more closely, positioning himself in the exact location that provided the best angle for her shot. Environmental conditions were optimal, with minimal wind and stable lighting that would not affect her scope's performance. Sarah controlled her breathing, settling into the shooting position that had become as natural as walking. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that shooting was about more than just hitting targets. It was about control, patience, and the kind of precision that could only be achieved when everything else fell away except the relationship between the shooter the rifle, and the target. The shot was perfect. The bullet traveled across 800 meters of Prague evening air, passed through the castle's medieval window with minimal deflection, and struck Viktor Kozlov exactly where Sarah had intended. The man who had funded terrorism and criminal enterprises throughout Eastern Europe collapsed without knowing what had hit him, his death so sudden and precise that security personnel required several seconds to understand what had happened. Sarah immediately began her extraction sequence, disassembling her rifle and preparing to move to the secondary position that would provide an escape route from the church tower. But as she gathered her equipment, she noticed something that had not been part of her mission briefing. Other observers were watching the castle, people with sophisticated surveillance equipment who were documenting everything that had happened. The realization was troubling, but not entirely unexpected. Operations of this type inevitably attracted attention from multiple intelligence agencies, each with their own interests and objectives. Sarah had been trained to expect surveillance and to operate under the assumption that her activities were being monitored by unknown parties. She completed her extraction from the church tower and moved toward the designated rally point where she would reunite with Marcus and Elena. The Prague streets were busy with evening foot traffic, providing excellent concealment for someone who knew how to blend into urban environments. Sarah's training had prepared her for this kind of movement, and she navigated through the city with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The rally point was a small cafe near the old town square, the kind of place where tourists gathered to experience Prague's historic atmosphere. Sarah arrived first and took a table that provided visibility of all approaches while maintaining easy access to multiple exit routes. Within minutes, Marcus and Elena joined her, their expressions indicating that the mission had been completed successfully. Target eliminated, Sarah reported quietly as her teammates settled into their seats. Materials retrieved, Elena confirmed, patting a small briefcase that contained whatever documents or objects Kozlov had been carrying. Extraction assets are standing by for immediate departure. Marcus was scanning the crowd around them with the constant vigilance that characterized his approach to security. "We have watchers," he said without looking directly at anyone. "At least 3 teams that I have identified, possibly more. This operation has attracted more attention than we anticipated." The observation confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the surveillance she had noticed from the church tower. Their mission had been successful, but it was taking place within a larger intelligence environment that included players whose identities and objectives remained unknown. The complexity was intimidating, but also strangely exciting, evidence that her work was significant enough to attract international attention. The team's extraction from Prague proceeded smoothly despite the surveillance, with Elena's knowledge of local routes and Marcus's security expertise enabling them to reach their departure point without incident. Sarah found herself thinking about the shot she had made and its implications for her future with the organization. She had successfully completed her first operational assignment, proving that her training and abilities translated effectively to real-world conditions. The flight back to Washington provided time for operational debriefing and assessment. Director Walsh met them personally upon arrival, her presence indicating the importance she placed on evaluating the team's performance. Sarah was particularly interested in her assessment, as it would determine whether she would receive additional assignments or be returned to conventional military duties. "Outstanding work," Director Walsh said as she reviewed their mission reports. "The target elimination was executed with exactly the kind of precision we require, and the intelligence materials you retrieved are already providing valuable information about Kozlov's network." Sarah felt a mixture of professional pride and personal satisfaction. Her first operational mission had been successful by every measure that mattered, validating the training she had received and the confidence that had been placed in her abilities. But she also understood that success brought increased responsibility and higher expectations for future assignments. "There is something else," Director Walsh continued, producing a folder that contained photographs and documents related to the Prague operation. Your performance has attracted attention from the highest levels of our organization. Colonel Harrison specifically requested that I convey his congratulations and inform you that you have exceeded every expectation we had for your operational debut. The praise was gratifying, but Sarah was more interested in what it meant for her future assignments. She had tasted operational work and found it both challenging and rewarding, the kind of service that utilized her skills while contributing to objectives that mattered on a national level. Director Walsh seemed to read her thoughts. Your next assignment will be significantly more complex, she said. We have identified a situation in Southeast Asia that requires someone with your particular combination of skills and judgment. The mission will test everything you learned during your first operation while presenting challenges that are unique to that operational environment. Sarah accepted the prospect of increased responsibility with the same calm determination she brought to everything else. Her journey from anonymous soldier to specialized operative was continuing, with each assignment building on the foundation established by her grandfather's legacy and her own commitment to exceptional service. Over the following months, Sarah completed a series of increasingly complex missions that established her reputation within the organization as someone who could be trusted with the most challenging assignments. Each operation tested different aspects of her capabilities while contributing to strategic objectives that protected American interests around the world. But it was during a mission in Central America that Sarah encountered something that changed her understanding of her place within the organization. While conducting surveillance of a target location, she noticed another operative working in the same area, someone whose techniques and equipment suggested exceptional training and capabilities. When she finally made contact with this individual, Sarah discovered that he too carried the Deadeye Insignia, marking him as another member of the exclusive group that had received this recognition. His name was David Chun, a former Marine sniper who had been recruited through the same process that had brought Sarah into the organization. Your grandfather trained my instructor, David told her during a brief conversation at their safe house. The techniques you use, the way you approach complex shots, it all traces back to the same foundational methods. We are part of a tradition that goes back generations, people who serve in ways that cannot be publicly acknowledged but are essential for protecting what matters most. The conversation helped Sarah understand that her recruitment was part of a larger pattern, a continuing effort to identify and develop individuals who possess the rare combination of technical skill and moral character required for this type of service. Her grandfather's influence extended far beyond the shooting lessons he had given her, encompassing a philosophy of service that emphasized precision, discipline, and unwavering commitment to protecting innocent lives. As Sarah's operational experience grew, she began to recognize the signs that indicated when someone possessed the potential for this kind of work. She started informally mentoring younger soldiers who demonstrated exceptional marksmanship skills, passing along the same lessons that her grandfather had taught her, while watching for individuals who might eventually be recruited for specialized service. The circle was continuing, with each generation of operatives identifying and developing the next group of specialists who would carry on the tradition. Sarah realized that her role was not just to complete missions, but to help ensure that the organization would continue to have access to people with the skills and character required for this type of work. Years later, when Sarah had achieved senior status within the organization, she found herself in a position similar to the one Colonel Harrison had occupied when he first approached her. She was tasked with identifying and recruiting exceptional individuals who could be trained for specialized operations, continuing the cycle that had brought her into this world. Standing in an armory not unlike the one where she had first encountered Colonel Harrison, Sarah watched a young soldier working on an M24 rifle with the kind of focused attention that suggested exceptional capability. The soldier's techniques were impressive, but, more importantly, her approach to the work demonstrated the kind of character and discipline that the organization valued. Sarah approached the young woman, noting the careful way she maintained her weapon and the subtle modifications that suggested advanced knowledge of precision shooting. The soldier's name was Jennifer Walsh, and her service record indicated exactly the kind of potential that the organization sought in its operatives. "Specialist Walsh," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same quiet authority that Colonel Harrison had used years before. "I'm Colonel Martinez. I have been observing your work." The young soldier came to attention, her expression showing the same mixture of curiosity and apprehension that Sarah remembered feeling during her own recruitment. The wheel was turning again, with another generation preparing to accept the responsibilities and challenges that came with carrying the Deadeye Insignia. Sarah smiled slightly as she began the conversation that would change Jennifer Walsh's life forever, continuing the tradition of service that connected her to her grandfather and to all the others who had chosen to serve in ways that would never be publicly recognized but were essential for protecting the things that mattered most. The legacy was secure, passed from one generation to the next through individuals who understood that some services could only be performed by those willing to work silently and accept recognition that would come only from those who share their commitment to exceptional precision and unwavering duty.